Hello, everyone. Welcome to EA Zoom meetings. This particular meeting is called You Are Uranus. My name is Tara All. Thank you for being here if you're here live, and also thank you if you're tuning in the future. So today, I'm very excited because for the past almost 5 years, I have been working with a technique called Planets on the First, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. And after spending time working with this technique, I've been recording meetings, one for each planet. And Uranus is the 7th meeting. So we're getting close to completing the 10. This year, they will all be complete. There is a series on YouTube EA Zoom meetings that you can check them all out. So this is basically a progression of that project. And this very first slide, I realize some of you may be tuning in, listening and not looking, but it's a slide of a picture that I took in Missouri. My partner and I were driving cross country, moving, and we happened to drive through a town called Uranus. And so I never can resist jumping out of the car when there's something astrologically related. And so this is a picture of that actual town. And before we get going into Uranus, which will be the focus of today, I just want to talk briefly about planets on the first, because many of you may have already heard me talk about this a number of times. If that's the case, tune out, or maybe I'll have something new to offer this round. But if you don't know about this, I want to at least give a little explanation that planets on the first is not a new technique, but it's one that I don't know of many people working with right now. And originally, it was my teacher, Adam Gainsburg, who inspired me to work with the technique, because a number of years back, I felt a struggle between kind of being in my heart, being present in my moment or in my body, while I struggled with the kind of intellectual side of astrology. And for me, I have a South Node in Gemini, and so that mental stuff is super active. And so I was looking for kind of a bridge, and his suggestion was to try planets on the first. And planets on the first, technically, and I'm not going to get into that today. If you want more information, you can go to my website. I have a whole little section on living planets first with some tools there, and or you can always reach out and contact me. And there are other meetings also about planets on the first that I did prior to this series that you can check out on EA Zoom meetings. But essentially what you do is you pick a planet that you want to pick as like the focal lens or the filter through which you live your life for a period of time. So let's just say, for example, that I know that Venus is something, and all the functions of Venus that we know, I'm struggling to actualize those in my life. I'm not feeling in contact with my Venus self. So I want to bring more of those things present into my daily life, into my experience. You would then essentially take your birth chart and rotate Venus to the ascendant. And this is the technical part. So this actual moment in geocentric time hasn't happened. It's an artificial chart, but you rotate it. And then none of the relationships between planets change, but where they are by house changes. And so taking something to the ascendant automatically gives it a very present, personal influence, right? We know that anyone that has a planet in their first house, planets on the ascendant, those things are an automatic filter. We instinctually show up that way. Those energies are very evident. We can see them in someone expressing without having to dig far. They tend to be on the surface. So moving a planet there is essentially making a choice to say, hey, I want to bring this part of me forward, and I want to live it first. And so for me, when I started working with this technique, it was my birthday, 2015, and I chose my first planet to live, which was Venus. And of course, I was, taking some notes and paying attention to what was happening in my life. And I had huge changes happen. Like living the Venus side of myself first gave me a really different experience in life. Brought really different things into my life. And the point of this presentation is not to talk about that, but it was a real enough experience for me that I kept doing it, choosing different planets every year, and encouraging my clients and my friends and the people around me to also try it as a therapeutic technique, but also just a way to experience astrology in a more visceral way. Okay. So digging into Uranus, and I think I have a slide on this in a bit, but let's just say that, well, we are talking about Uranus today. So if we were all going to choose to live Uranus first, that would be basically tapping into that part of ourselves and letting it sort of lead the show. I always think of our psyche as being made up of all these different parts. And I always think about them as people, just because that's easy for me. I think about if all those people were gathered around a table and they were all in a meeting, who would be in charge, right? What would the different roles be? And most of us have certain parts of ourselves that tend to take the lead. And astrology is a great way to look and identify those things that are already happening. So, you know, if you have super strong Saturn in your chart, that's going to take the lead a lot of the time. And if you have super strong Saturn in your chart, choosing Uranus first could be a good opportunity to give that part of you the leadership role around that table of your psyche. So holding that in mind as we go along here, this whole idea of this meeting is to explore what it's like to choose Uranus first. And we'll do that by looking at Uranus in some volunteers' natal charts, by talking about the planet itself, what we think it might mean, how it might show up. But nothing can replace your own experience. You know, a long time ago, Laura Nalbandian, when I was first starting classes with her, she said the only way to really get to know the archetypes is to develop your own relationship with them. You know, you have meditation with them. You go to sleep with an intention to dream about them and receive messages from them. You let them reveal to you what they mean and how they are and how they show up. And that only comes with spending time with yourself, with them. You know, I'm sure many of you are like me and have a library full of all these books that are amazing. And it's great to look up and see, what does this mean? And what does this tell me about me? And I still do that. I will probably always do that to some extent. But this living planets first shifted that for me in some respects. And the fact that living Venus first, for example, when I learned things about Venus that are particular to me that I couldn't have learned just reading about someone else's explanation about what Venus in Cancer might have been. And so I'm saying it's worth the time. And if you are an astrologer or aspiring to be an astrologer, it helps you bring some freshness to your material, to bring your own personal touch, you know, to weave your own personal experiences in, which are powerful. So back to Uranus, discovered in 1781, and it was named after the Greek god Uranus. And interestingly, it was the only planet not named after a Roman god, which already kind of touches on the individual different nature of Uranus. It does play by its own rules in us and in how we understand it as an archetype. So even from its naming, you know, it has something different. And the thing when in this whole series, so now that we've reached Uranus, after this we'll be doing Neptune and Pluto, and I've saved Sun for the end, so let's just set that aside. But Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, we oftentimes call those the outer planets, but that doesn't mean that they're not personal. Stephen Forrest does a great job of talking about the fact that how can anything not be personal when it's related to our lives, right? And so I've really taken that to heart. And even though these planets are further out and they do represent parts of ourselves that are connected with something greater, at the same time, they also represent how we personally relate to that greater part of which we are included. So my only point here is sometimes we get caught up in language saying, oh, you know, the personal planets are the ones inside Jupiter. And my only point here is to say that everything is personal when you're living your personal life as a human being on this planet. To some extent it is. And so this whole idea of living Uranus first is getting in touch with that personal part of it inside of you. So Uranus, though, because it is a broader, if that's even a good word to use, archetype, it serves humanity right? And we talk about, oftentimes we use words like the collective consciousness or the greater mind with Uranus. But at its core, at least the way that I'm working with it here, is that it's the highest expression of self. It's the greatest self. And that is still a very personal thing. That does not mean that we have transcended our separate personal ego self and become just merged with something greater. We are, of course, always merged with something greater. But this Uranus part of ourself is the highest expression of who we are individually as part of that greater. So some of these concepts, right? Individuation, we talk about a lot with Uranus, and wherever Uranus is in your natal chart, by sign and by house, we're looking at how the soul has been intending to individuate, how we're trying to awaken, the areas that we need to decondition from, right? It's the breaking away from the status quo. It's in some respects the response to Saturn. Saturn, there is a quality of holding on to the past and freezing time, and Uranus is about shattering and liberating from that particular space or time. And so Uranus is the part of us that is intimately in contact with the unknown, the unbound, which is truly what we are. And we can look at it as the awareness of the you, capital Y-U, behind the lowercase y-u. You know, it is the awareness of a consciousness that is greater than just my ego sense of self. And one thing I think about with Uranus in general, we talk a lot about it being disruptive, right? When it transits into a certain house or comes across a planet, contacts a planet, it tends to shake things up. It's unpredictable. We don't know what'll happen with it. And so I think one purpose that it serves is to shake things up, shake all the parts, and then to see how they settle. And the idea is that in the settling, it comes into a more natural form collectively of what that thing is. And so every time we get shaken up about something, we have a chance again to see how it settles. And there's something exciting in that, because the parts don't change, but how they organize does. And I think Uranus is part of that function in us. We just get attached to how the organization has been. We get attached to how we've felt the structure to be, just because we're comfortable with it. It's just comfort. Comfort brings security. But then the shaking up of it all of a sudden can bring a new alignment that is much more true to who we are, and then leads us into the next step of life. So Uranus serves that purpose. And so certainly it's very much attached to going our own way. We know that the rites of passage through Uranus major transits are big ones, right? You know, the Uranus opposition is sometimes known as the midlife crisis, which, you know, I don't prefer those terms, but it's how we've known it in this society. But it's very much a time where we wake up one morning and we say, wow, is this really the way I want to live my life? This doesn't feel like me. And the impulse is to get the hell out of Dodge and do something different. And the answer is not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but it can sure feel like there aren't any other options. So this whole function of Uranus is to change. And change means facing the unknown, which is frightening to most of us. Even if we like talking about change and think that we want change, most of us, when it comes down to it, have fear around that and resistance around that, which is totally natural. But the Uranus part of ourselves says, oh, let's do it anyway. You know, I mean, it wants to move into that space anyway. It wants to help us progress. You know, it's the planet of progression. So one of the things that I work with when choosing a planet first, thinking about it as being a focalizing crystal within yourself. Let's just say, you know, I like working with gemstones too. So let's say that I'm made up of 10 different gemstones, and I don't know, let's just say that Uranus is amethyst. So for now, I'm going to look through the world through an amethyst crystal. And that amethyst crystal is going to reveal to me things through that Uranus perspective. And when you choose a planet first, it helps to kind of know what some of those questions will be when you approach life. So with Uranus as being untethered freedom, liberation, originality, progress, if you choose to live your life Uranus first, whether it be for a day or a week or a year, kind of one thing you can experiment with is as you're going through your day, from situation to situation, you can be asking yourself these questions. Is this liberal enough for me? Is it interesting enough for me? Is it new enough, unique enough? Is it radical enough? Is there enough freedom for me in this? And another great question for Uranus is, are there going to be a bunch of crazy rules and customs I have to follow? You know, or am I going to have space to be me? You know, I use the word crazy with Uranus, not in a negative way at all, but like there's a part in all of us that is like, we want it to be crazy good, crazy different. And so from the Uranus perspective, there needs to be room for something different. This is very much like Einstein talking about no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness from that created it. We have to have something different. Uranus requires something different. And that requires taking a risk. So in every moment of your day, let's say you've been a person who's been pretty averse to taking risk. You like things pretty much staying the same. You don't like a lot of change. You don't like unexpected things happening. You don't even particularly like surprises. And I'm just generalizing here. But if that was the case, and you chose Uranus first, you might find this untapped part of yourself emerging that you didn't realize was there. And it can turn the excitement back on for life. You know, it can turn passion back on for life. It can literally open your mind to a different level of consciousness. You just need a little bit of shifting in there. So as you're going through your day, if you choose to do Uranus first, let's just say, maybe you're at work, you ask yourself these questions. Hey, is my job interesting enough for me? And I'm not saying to go and get rid of it if it's not, but listen to yourself respond when you ask the question. Is this relationship with so-and-so? Does it leave me room to be who I am? Does it support me growing and changing? Is the conversation interesting? Is this group I'm in interesting enough? Is it enough outside the box that I feel like I'm learning something new? Anyway, you get the point. And so these types of questions I have on my website as a free tool. It's very, very simple for each planet. So if Uranus isn't your gig and you don't want to choose it first, but you like this idea and maybe it's the moon, you can go look at those questions, and it's a great way to start. It's a great way to start a conversation with that part of yourself, with the other parts of yourself. So when I messaged Linda recently about this meeting, I had just discovered, sometimes I'm a little slow to pick up on what's actually happening in my life, at least astrologically, but I was thinking about, the birth of living planets first for myself. And I realized I have a bi-wheel up here of my birth chart in the inner wheel, and then the day that I started living my first planet first. And it was literally right as I was coming into my Uranus opposition. And so that actually really makes me smile, because I feel like planets first very much is a Uranian type thing. And so if you're into planets first at all, there probably is definitely a part of you that kind of wants to bend the rules a little bit, so what if the chart isn't necessarily a real chart? Who made up those rules? Who says that this can't be, as real of an experience, that you can't create your own experience how you want it to be? We're born with a birth chart, and I certainly believe that birth chart holds our potential, but how we use that and work within it and alter it and alchemize it, we have so much space. So anyhow, that was just my interesting revelation, and I just wanted to share that clearly Uranus has had its fingerprints on this whole process for me, and this whole series really. So even when I'm talking about Moon or Saturn or Venus, all of this has had a Uranian nature to it. So just a little bit about Uranus right now before we jump into the examples, which is the volunteers are always my favorite part, because real life examples, like, it just doesn't get better than that. But Uranus in the sky right now, we know Uranus has an 84-year orbit, and it's currently transiting Taurus. when, it did a retrograde as normal. So we had a little preview of that May 2018 to November 2018. But as of March 2019, it's been full in Taurus, and it will be there until April 2026. So I have been sitting around with that a little bit, and especially with our current state of affairs here in the whole world. We're in a very interesting, challenging time. And because it's challenging, it means we also are in a space of huge potential to do something different, which for me automatically brings Uranus into the conversation. Now, the last time that Uranus was in Taurus was 1934 to 1942. And that was Hitler coming into power, World War II. And what's interesting is I was kind of Googling around, just looking at all this, because history is not my forte, but it's important that we look at it, and I'm trying to do a better job of incorporating it. And it has been fascinating me. But just a year before Uranus moved into Taurus in 1934, so meaning it was at the end of its transit in Aries, Franklin Roosevelt gave his first inaugural address with the famous quote, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," which in some ways I feel like was a statement that would carry its way not just through the coming Uranus and Taurus period, which was very, very difficult, but that truly, as we sit here today with Uranus and Taurus, it is just as powerful a statement. And I recognize that in the United States, many of us don't feel like we have a leader that is, we don't need to get into this. We don't have a leader certainly that's inspiring us. So maybe we go back and listen to leaders before. Those messages are still just as effective. And right now, with the current situation with the coronavirus, which I have no intention in getting into and talking about today, that same statement, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, is present right now. We are literally being faced with that. And this coronavirus is forcing us to look at resources, money, what we value, our sense of ownership, and what we consider to be mine. And including that, and by the way, these are all Taurus things I'm talking about here, so I'm referring to Uranus being in Taurus. This idea that things are mine is not the case. We are all in this together. And Taurus also rules the physical body. Uranus is unexpected, unpredictable shots. It's whatever it takes to eject us from a stuck position that isn't serving us. And we, at least in the United States, have continued to try to expand, even when the world around us, and literally the earth, is breaking and failing and being used up in its sense of resources. So Taurus, of course, loves to find comfort in security. It likes to have its, what makes it feel good. It likes to have plenty of money. It likes to have plenty of food. It likes to feel secure in going through the same routines and habits that it's used to. And Uranus touching that is basically saying not an option anymore. And it's a terrible thing we're experiencing. But this is what I mean by it being rich in opportunity. One of my favorite podcasts around this topic is Michael Mead's Living Myth podcast. It's called The Time of Conscious Descent. And if you're interested, and if you're not familiar with Michael Mead, he's a mythologist and he has an amazing perspective on things. I would recommend this highly. Some things that he says in there is he says, we must listen to the body of humanity. And when he said that, I was thinking about Uranus and Taurus. Taurus ruling the physical body, Uranus being a higher sense of consciousness, right? The higher or greater body is everybody. And he talks about how we're all in this together. We all affect each other. And he describes this as a collective rite of passage being underway. And we get to choose how we respond to that. We get to choose what we really value. And I'm not saying don't take care of ourselves. I'm saying take care of ourselves in a bigger context, meaning looking out for each other and being willing to change even when it's uncomfortable, being willing to step back from expansion to make sure that we actually have a solid foundation. Another Taurus thing. You know, when Uranus touching Taurus lets you know where the roots are not secure. And so another thing that Michael Meade mentioned is that part of what he feels like is happening now is that the teachings that show us that we're all interconnected haven't gotten through to enough of us. And so we're needing something a little more extreme to get there. So it's up to all of us to help each other get there. So that's all I was saying about that, but I think it's worth thinking about this with Uranus. I mean, right now we have a good example to see how that is. And if we were to each choose to live Uranus first right now, while it's transiting Taurus, one thing that I would say, it would be amazing if we all really looked at what really has value, meaning, and purpose to us. And what does it mean to be part of a body of humanity? You know, I don't remember whose work it was, but there was some time in the past I was reading something. It was about generosity and charity. And I wish I could remember who it was to give the proper credit. But basically the idea was that when you come to the realization that we are all one organism, that we are all interconnected, there is no such thing as charity and generosity. It is your obligation to take care of yourself, and yourself extends to the all of us, extends to the world, extends to everything. And that's a different, radical way of looking at the Taurus type of things. And of course, Uranus would be about the radical perspective. So how can we each get more radical, radical about valuing what really matters, radical about in the way that we actually start to build security, not just for ourselves, but for our communities and people around us. How do we look at building strong roots and foundations, things that are sustainable? The list goes on. Okay, so we're going to launch into volunteers, and I am going to offer myself as the first volunteer. And before I read through these questions, I just want to go through a couple little notes that I have here that I wanted to share. So with Uranus in general, when you're working with that energy, it requires, just like I was talking about how Einstein says you can't solve a problem on the level of the problem. So you have to step outside of where you are. You can look at this as being above, below, whatever works for you. But you have to change the level of where you are within and without. And to do something different, or to get something different, you have to do something different. So when we're exploring these questions with the volunteers, I'm curious to see what situations came up where they needed to do something different to get something different. And usually uncomfortable situations surround those changes. And another interesting thing that I had in my little Uranus note section here is that Uranus is about seeing things as both versus either or. So just sit with that. The Uranus mind sees things as both. The Mercury mind sees things as either or. So when we're choosing, working with, dealing with Uranus, it helps us to stop and try to see things as both, not to separate things, not to make it about me and you or this and that, to look at everything as a collective first. And that helps us have more objectivity, which is one of the gifts of Uranus. So by sign and by house, and particularly by house when we're working with evolutionary astrology, Uranus shows either where the soul has broken free, has experienced radical change, or it needs to break free. It's also where we can attract a whole lot of chaos, chaotic situations, chaotic people. Depending on where it is, we'll usually show the type of situations, but chaos is a common thing to experience. And it's also where we can experience or attract unusual and unconventional things. So if you have, Uranus in the 7th house, like I do, which we'll leap to in a minute, you may attract unusual people, maybe chaotic people. And it's also where we can oftentimes feel like the rug has been ripped out from underneath us. That area of life sometimes feel like it's gone through a lot of trauma, right? Trauma is a word we use in evolutionary astrology around Uranus oftentimes, where the soul has experienced past trauma, where the soul is working through trauma, where we may have fractured parts of ourselves, of our psyche off, or dissociated from certain parts of ourselves because of trauma. So all these things can be going on in this area where we find Uranus truly by sign, house, or aspects in the natal chart. But by house is a great place to start with this. It's also where we can have these sudden radical shifts in consciousness. It can be an area of life where we, quote unquote, get ahead of our time, or all of a sudden realize a new way to do things, or completely reinvent that part of ourselves, and maybe even help others to reinvent that on a greater scale. Okay, so the questions, and I will repeat the questions for each of the volunteers. So don't worry if volunteers are watching and worrying that you can't remember the questions, but I'll read through them once here, and then I'll read them for each time. So I want to look at how Uranus energy has shown up in your life, how those experiences helped you grow, liberate from old patterns, and live more authentically, more true to who you are. And in what ways did you have to enter the unknown in order to awaken and change? And I think of, Uranus in the tarot is linked, associated with the Fool. And the Fool, of course, is 0. It's before the 1. It's the beginning before the beginning. It's the literal space where you've stepped away from one thing, you're still in the air, and you haven't landed it in the next thing. It's taking a risk. It's trusting in yourself and in life to move into something that you don't know. It's 0 ground. It's starting from 0. And so we're always going through all these cycles in our lives, cycles upon cycles upon cycles. But when we're working with Uranus in particular, there's something about having that sort of innocence in that space of 0. And then I want to talk about what's the greatest gift you've received and what advice you might give others when it comes to embracing the Uranian energy. I will do an abbreviated version of myself, so we have more time for Julia and Magdalene, who are kind enough to share their life experiences with us here. But here's my chart. And for anyone who is listening but not watching, I have Uranus in Libra in the 7th house. It is square my sun in Cancer. And that's probably enough information. I'm going to describe some things. Of course, the first question is briefly tell us how Uranus energy has shown up in my life. So just quick addition, I have Pluto also in Libra. It's in the 6th house, but on the descendant. So I offer this because I think the two of those together have framed a lot of my experiences that I'm going to share. But for me, Uranus has shown up in my life, in particular in my relationships. And for anyone who doesn't know my history in relationships, it's been very tumultuous. It's actually very wonderful and solid and stable now. But for the first, 20 years of my adulthood, it was pretty crazy. I got married at 18 the first time, and I don't know if I've shared this before, but I got married to someone who was a convicted criminal and who also was an alcoholic. And that was crazy. Those 11 years of my life, I can confidently say that they were crazy. Crazy in the sense that I was trying to live out old patterns, and I was trying to like fix things and make things work, and not really, I guess, seeing the truth of what was in front of my face. But at the deeper level, I think I wasn't allowing the quote unquote crazy in myself, the rebelliousness in myself, the part of me that didn't really want to follow the rules, but maybe didn't have the guts to actually step out and do my own thing. I attracted a version of that in a partner that was that was very extreme. And to speak to that Uranus in the seventh house, that partner ended up dying in an accident, self-destructive accident. And so all of that for me is very illustrative of Uranus in the seventh house. Things out of my control, things unpredictable, things shaking up my world. I would come home from work and never know what situation my home would be in or what would be happening. I kind of live in a constant state of fear of what might happen. And that's why I call it crazy. So, but how did it help me grow and liberate? It pushed me to my edge. It pushed me to my edge that it got uncomfortable enough that I realized one day that I was going to completely lose myself if I didn't step out of that relationship. And I felt a need. I felt responsible for that person's life. And that's a whole different conversation. But in the end, when I finally did make the decision to leave, it was not just liberating from that relationship. It was liberating from, in big part, a past karmic pattern that I had had. And in what ways did I need to enter the unknown? I had to step away from that relationship, not knowing if that person would make it or not. You know, I couldn't know the answer to that. I couldn't be sure. And I also, I didn't know what would happen to me, but the scarier unknown was, I had to step out on my own and let the pieces fall where they might fall. And that's an example of that sort of shaking up of Uranus that I talked about and seeing where they fall out. And they fell out where they fell out. The death happened very shortly. Actually, I think only a month after me leaving. So the fallout was traumatic too. But that wasn't my responsibility. Someone else's life is not our responsibility. And so that was the lesson that I learned. I gained a huge freedom in that piece. And so overall, I would say my greatest gift from Uranus has been the ability, or even maybe the guts, to step out of something, not knowing where it's going to go, but with the confidence that that me doing individual me doing my path the way that I'm called to do it is the most important thing I can do. And it's like that Uranus has given me the gift of, with the big stamp of approval, saying not only is this okay, but this is exactly what you're here to do. And so that's been that's been how it's been for me. So my advice to others when working with Uranus or with the Uranian energy when it comes is, be willing to see things from a different way. Truly be willing to get on a different level. And just expect the unexpected. Like, I mean, if it's Uranus, you can't predict it. Like, it doesn't work that way. But you can, like, get yourself sort of ready to have the unpredictable. And there's an exciting side to that too. And the idea that we're in control is just an illusion anyways, we all know. So in some ways, Uranus is just sort of letting what is real happen without interfering with it. So, yeah. Okay, so same questions. Julia, are you there? If you are, unmute yourself and let's look at your chart.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi. So before we
Hi.
Julia, before we start, I just want to tell people, because I know if they're anything like me, I tend to listen to these meetings more than I watch. So I'm just going to tell them briefly about you have Uranus in Aquarius and
Yeah.
it in the fourth house. And it is conjunct Neptune, which is in Capricorn. And on the other side, it's conjunct Jupiter, which is in Aquarius. And it's also quincunx to Sun and Mercury in Virgo. Right? Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So with that, Julia, so first of all, can you tell us how that Uranus energy personally for you, how has it shown up in your life?
I feel the energy of Uranus most in when it comes about family. When I was a child, I have a tendency to wanting to protect, especially my mother and my sister, and it was very common to me to think that I should protect my sister or my mother because other was not really. I always felt like my family was not the common type of family, you know. Um, and yeah, I feel this influence of Uranus in the sense of not having a very common family. My father not had a very good sister, and so I always carried a little bit of this burden with me to trying to protect my family and so on. And I see this influence of Uranus through needing to liberate, and follow my own personality, not necessarily doing things to please my mother or to make my mother and my sister happy, because I also always was very different from my family. I always felt very different from my mother. From my sister, I have tastes very different from them. And I realized this also because of my North Node that is there in the 11th house, the house ruled by Aquarius, right?
Yep.
And Uranus. And so I also felt this need to liberate, to
Yeah.
to really follow my own personality, not caring if it's hurting my family,
Yeah.
my partners, it's really to follow my own, to respect my own emotional needs.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you
Don't
feel?
carry others,
No.
don't carry the.
How do you feel like, so those experiences that you went through,
Can
those
you repeat?
yeah, those different experiences that you had with your family, maybe the ones that were more difficult, maybe the ones where you tried to take care of them, how would you say that they helped you grow or to actually break out of your patterns? Like, did you like,
How do you help me?
yeah, like how did they help you? So, like for me, I was saying I had to sort of, I had to get really uncomfortable before I would do something different. And I'm wondering what it was like for you. Like,
Yes, for sure.
yeah, like in those experiences, like, did it have to get more uncomfortable before you would actually do something different? Because what I'm looking for is like all these things that we experience with Uranus, like oftentimes they are uncomfortable. They're scary. they feel traumatic. You know, we feel separated from other people, or we feel unseen, but they serve a purpose. And I was just wondering if how you would describe how they've helped you.
Well, I'll say it helped me because I'm currently still trying to heal my inner child, you know. Trying to, and I see this influence of Uranus. I see that it helped me because I always have many needs that I was expecting to be fulfilled by other in relationships. I was expecting to be fulfilled by especially relationships. Seeking this, this understanding, and I received it through my family, and I felt so much from family because I was first to really present my own personality to, and so I kind of had this lack, this being a little bit nervous to talk, and so
Yeah.
but this, I it broke me many expectations from others, and
It
yeah,
sounds
I
like,
guess that's it.
yeah, it sounds like that it helped you grow up partially by just pushing you to be yourself.
Yes.
What would you say is the greatest gift that you've received from Uranus?
Mm, to be open and to understand that my own feelings are not responsible to hurt one, and to, yeah, I guess that's it, that to liberate this illusion, that my emotional needs fits the other expectations and to others ideas, and also to have this freedom in my way of feel, to don't expect others to be necessarily confirmed to what is considered to be okay, how a relationship need to be, how a family need to be, how what a family need to have to be considered normal. Because I always was very attracted to partners that was very different, that came from very different environments,
Yeah. What advice would you give someone else who's maybe facing some tough, either maybe tough Uranus transits, or maybe they're just choosing to work with Uranus in their own life? What advice would you give them?
Well, I recommend to let their emotions come to surface, and to don't label any emotion as wrong or right, and to don't have this duality, to just, yeah, I guess, to just feel how they are, and don't get very much fixed in that concept of what is right and what is wrong to feel, and to, yeah, I guess that's it.
I like that, because that's that emotional freedom. I mean, that's if you can give that gift to yourself the way you just described it, that emotional freedom, and then if you can share that gift with other people, um, changes how we're able to have relationships, right? I mean, it changes everything, that emotional freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I feel more this impression of Uranus of liberating the emotions also because how I can see I have Chiron there in the first house, and I have yeah, I feel very much that Chiron and also my Venus opposing Saturn. I feel very much that, you know, that sense that if I do something wrong, I will not be accepted by people.
Yeah.
I will feel that I will not be accepted by my personality, by my body, by being just vulnerable. I also feel this very much, this struggle to be vulnerable, to be this, you know, this fear of being judged
Mm.
by how the others perceive me, especially relationships. I would say I took my Saturn.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy that I have a strong Saturn in my chart too. And the judgment and also just the sense of responsibility, you know, like
Yes.
the feeling, it can sometimes can feel like that we're our responsibility to other people, whether it be family or partners or whoever it is, can feel so strong. While at this Uranus, I feel like would say that our own personal development is the most important thing, you know, and so that's it. There's also a freedom in itself there, but it's not easy when you're trying to work with with all those parts at the same time. You know, Saturn doesn't just stop having its conversation just because you're, you know, working with Uranus. So I appreciate you sharing that Saturn piece because I think it helps us all see that it wasn't easy for you to do what I would call your Uranus in the fourth house work, you know, to break free from that
Yes.
space. Yeah.
And
But
I thought it was in, sorry.
no, go ahead. Please go ahead. Julia, continue.
I I decided to mention about my Uranus and talking about the relationship towards my mother and my sister because I feel very much this need when I told you about feeling my Venus opposing Saturn because in relationships I kind of have been always trying to please the others and to feel this fear of being rejected because in my family I always felt my sister and my mother being a bit rejected and on confirming exactly to my father and the rest of my family, and so I kind of, you know, I kind of was seeing my partners going through the same that my mother was going through, like really needing someone to be that person that they were expecting to be.
Mm, yeah,
I guess that's it.
that's good. But it sounds like you've given yourself a lot more freedom. Is your
Yes, for
relationship
sure.
is your relationship is it better with your mom and your sister since you've become more comfortable just doing you?
Yes, definitely.
Because I think it's funny, even when it feels like, and I'm not saying this is the case in every situation, but for in most times when we get comfortable with just being who and what we are, it's actually more comfortable for other people as well. You know, there's less tension.
Yes,
And
yes, yes.
yeah, and everyone doesn't have to like it, but there's something about authenticity that's more trustworthy. you know, and
Yes.
it's worth a lot. It's a gift not just to yourself, it's a gift to everyone around you, that freedom.
Yes.
So
It
thank you,
seems like
Julia.
they haven't felt.
What?
Okay.
Say that last part one more time.
I will say that it seems like they have felt it energetically, like since you appear to be more attractive,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
more authentic.
Yeah. No, you're right. That authentic energy is attractive.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good insight. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and
yes.
for sharing, Julia. Your chart's a good
Thank
example.
you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's see what Magdalene, are you there?
Yep.
There you are. Okay, so before we jump in, let's just let people know about your chart. Magdalene, you have Uranus in Sagittarius in the 3rd house, and it's trine your Mercury Mars conjunction in Leo, and it's square your Sun in Virgo.
Yep. And my moon.
Yes, it is. From both sides. Nice. Well, so first question is, how has Uranus energy shown up in your life? If you can just give, either an example or a theme.
Yeah. I think it's shown up very strongly and distinctly for a long time. I remember very distinctly around 12 years old, kind of realizing that kind of the world we're living in is kind of arbitrary, like societal rules and just how things were seem pretty arbitrary and often unfair. And for example, I grew up Catholic, and I would see priests who were all male, and women weren't allowed in the priesthood, and no one could give me a straight answer.
Yeah.
Right? So it seemed. So from a pretty young age, I felt like I did want to, I felt myself being molded by society and the different kind of social situations I was being brought up in, and I felt that I wanted to decondition from all of them.
Yeah, I like you. So this is interesting because you just brought up religion, and not that it always shows up, but you have Uranus and Sagittarius, right? So it's a nice archetypal alignment. So it's a good, that need to break away from what's been considered, the beliefs. Yeah. So what would you say, did you have more to share about those particular examples, or did you want me to move on?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was gonna go on with
Yeah.
that.
Well, yeah, please do, because we have enough time. And I think for me, like, the examples are what really help us learn and have more insight. So if you have more, please continue. I would love it.
Sure. And then later in life, I started meditating, and I felt that I felt like my goal there was Uranian. Like, I remember reading in Jeff Green's work that Uranus is associated with the diamond mind, right? A state of no conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that totally resonated. And I felt that was my motivation at that time from meditating. Yeah. And
where did anything come through that?
Meditation.
Yeah, like, I mean, in that contacting with the diamond mind, like, did you have any moments that you don't have to share them, but if you did, I'd be very curious to hear.
I went a little bit nuts. This is when I was 20 years old. I remember at that time I would, as far as like 3rd house stuff goes, like I would like try to read the spaces between words,
Mm-hmm.
and like,
yeah,
it just,
I do.
Yeah, I just went kind of off the rails there.
Yeah, but I mean, we've all probably heard that the truth is actually in the space between, so I think
No way. I don't believe that.
but that's, I mean, but that's
Yeah.
it's like,
in the
it's not
silence.
yeah, or in the space. So interesting.
And
And
yeah, I'd say it went like too extreme, perhaps in that Iranian direction, like even kind of getting into some dangerous situations as well. And like I felt there was a lot of, for the rest of my life up until now, there's a lot of modulation of that energy.
yeah, it's interesting. And I love this, how, mine's in the seventh house, and that dangerous that you talk about, I clearly crossed that line in relationships early in my life, like, and then it's interesting with Julia, hers being in the fourth house, everything, right, focused around family so much. But now with yours, it's the third house, right, with so much is like the mental process. But it's interesting that you bring in danger around the mental process, because we don't talk about that as much. No, like we don't talk about what can happen when you really go down the rabbit hole around those things. So it's interesting for me to hear your perspective around, going too far. I didn't bring that up earlier, but that absolutely can be a Uranian type thing, right? To go too far off the grid, to get to fracture off so far that we,
right.
So after that, what happened? So you push the edge a little bit or whatnot, but at some point you must have, sounds like you're back to somewhere in the.
Yeah, there's a lot of seesawing, and modulation has definitely been a big theme for me.
Yeah. And did a lot of it seem to be in your like your thinking or in your mental?
Early on it was around when I was 20 or so. But nowadays it's more in my in kind of balancing security with these more Uranian tendencies. For example, like I in 2017 I left my job to study shamanism in Peru.
Wow.
And but I'm right back in my job right now. Like,
yeah, but that's Uranus in the third house. That's a great, any kind of journey, I guess, right? But that
mental journey.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing.
But I find that how it shows up in my life now is, it's not you. I don't find that Uranian energy totally joyous, and that it causes distress, because you want to go that way. I might want to go that way, but also I love security, and I love, and part of me also loves doing what everyone else is doing, and like, just
it's kind of
being with normal people.
That sounds very human. I think we're all finding that balance, and of course, Carl Jung said there is no coming to consciousness without pain, which implies that working with Uranus, like we're on some level the human part of ourselves, the self-identity part that wants the security, it is going to experience that other impulse, I think, as painful. So I guess we're all kind of in charge of how far we want to stretch. I think about Uranus too, like it stretches us. It stretches us. Sometimes I don't know if you felt this way, but I know when I've been going through Uranian times, it literally feels like my mind and my body, like I'm literally stretching. I think it's an olive bean that calls the Uranus opposition the snapping transit, which is another way to look at it. Because it has that feel, it has that feel literally of like something's breaking, like it's going to stretch to a point and it's going to break. And
Uranus squared my Venus and my opposed my Pluto in December.
Oh,
So
how's that?
that was a huge transit.
Yeah. How
The
did
end of,
it change you?
it was the end of a relationship, but also kind of brought in a need for a lot more honesty in life.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's never about the relationship that ends or change. It's always about like the relationship dynamic, you know? So that idea of bringing more honesty, I'm sure is something you'd been needing to do way before this relationship, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so how about this? I think I forgot to ask Julia this question, but I want to ask it of you. In what ways did you have to enter the unknown when you were working with Uranus? I'm sure like within your mental journeys, you probably had to do it a lot of times, but
Right.
I'd still love to hear you talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, at that time it was fun, I think. Right. I guess it was like the Fool card.
Yeah.
Right.
What about this recent one with the relationships? Did you have to enter any unknown territory in that?
Yes, as far as being more honest than I've ever been in relationship, and to myself and to everybody around me. Yeah. That was entering the unknown, but it felt very good to jump. You know,
Yeah.
I was being brought to the edge for a long time. Right.
Cool. Yeah. It probably was almost a relief to jump.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I imagine like us standing on the edge of a precipice or edge of a, thing like 1 foot in the air, right? Your whole body's tired of waiting to jump.
Right.
Eventually you just,
Right.
you just got to do it.
You'll land somewhere.
Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah. What would you say for you is the greatest gift that you've received from your own Uranus process?
A lot of distress and
Yeah, but
yeah.
nobody will want to work with it if that's the best.
No, I feel like it's almost inevitable that it has to be worked with, you know?
Yeah. Oh,
that it's you could fight against it or you could flow with it.
Yes, like everything, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But truly, like, if you had, like, let's say today, you're standing up in front of a bunch of people and you got to say sort of, through all those Uranian things, how are you a better person? Is it the honesty piece? Because when you just shared that felt that felt like a really big deal.
I mean, that's still a work in progress, I would say. But I think, Uranus energy, it just feels very good, right? Like it's clear and refined and unmuddied, right?
Yeah,
and
don't you feel like I feel like it's clean?
Yeah, it feels like the air in February.
Yeah, which is great because so much of the time we live our lives like, I don't know, in the old bog of old things, that is not clear. It's like all tied to the past or whatever. You're right. There is a complete, fresh, clear crispness to that. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. I hadn't thought about that, but I like it. I'll use that again. Clean. What advice? Go ahead. Keep going.
I mean, it's hard. I feel like with Uranus, it's also might be easy to develop like a sense of, because you're not doing what other people are doing, to develop a sense of superiority, right?
Yeah, that's probably one of the, probably a thing
shadow.
Yeah,
of Aquarius, right?
Yeah, I think for sure, I think what you're hitting on to me, that it's the arrogance that somehow because I've contacted my higher mind, I am now a higher being, like.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
for sure.
Or I'm not like the sheeple.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course, because there can be a thing of also like the because that idea of uniqueness is there, right? With that energy, that the idea can be all of a sudden that I'm, I'm not like anybody else, and that makes me so much, better than them. And so, no, you're right. It's good to think about the shadow sides as well.
Right.
As long as you can keep in mind that even while you're individuating and, kind of coming into your greatest self, you're all still part of everything else at the same time. That I don't believe in things as far as being something better than another, or it's just everybody's just at their own space is really how I look at it. But I think you're right. I think that definitely is a shadow side. Yeah, especially if you think that especially if you think your mind is evolved, right? Because it's really easy to go from a place of thinking that you're a bigger thinker, or somehow your insights are more truthful, that somehow equates to better. And this is an example of where I was talking about how the natural, authentic Uranus thinking is about both. It doesn't separate that way. But we as humans always tend to separate things that way. Better, worse,
Right.
good, bad, all those things.
Yeah. It's the trine to Gemini, I guess.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to others?
About Uranus?
Yeah. Oops, I mean to go there. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So let's say that somebody else, since this is about planets first and living Uranus first, let's just say someone, maybe they haven't been ready to embrace that energy, but they decide that they're going to go for it. They're going to live Uranus first and choose the unknown and choose change and choose to sort of break free. What advice would you give them?
I guess liberate, but always do it from a loving place, like self-love and love of others. So yeah, that Uranus energy can get very detached, right? And
yeah, you're right. You can kind of forget about that we humans, we still need kindness and care, and
right.
you need a safe place to land if you're going to take a big leap.
and I guess trust too, right?
Yeah.
And like as you said, there's always going to be some place to land, right? Always
Yeah.
land somewhere.
Yeah, and so it's good if you can make sure that you have a good place to land for yourself. I think that's part of that kindness you were talking about.
Right.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Awesome. This has been great having you here, Magdalene. Thank you for sharing your personal journey with us. It's a good one.
That was more personal than I was expecting to get into. But.
Good. I love it. Thank you. Well, Linda,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Linda, I think if you're there, I don't know if we have, I think we're right about at time. I don't know if we have any questions. I think I see something in the chat, but I can't quite see it.
Jenny, would you like to share what you wrote in the chat?
Here, I'll go in here.
Okay.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Great. Yeah, I was saying when you're talking about comparing yourself, that Molly McCord says the moment you compare yourself to someone else, you step out of your power.
Yeah.
And then my Uranus is right in a row with my moon and my rising.
Wow.
At 24, 25, and it was 26 or 27 in Scorpio. So I think that's kind of special. I'm not sure what that's about though.
Yeah, but if it's right on the ascendant, that means so much of how you just step into life is that Uranian energy. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's like you just do it. That's exciting.
Fun.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
I just wanted to ask you a general question about planets on the first.
Yeah, please.
I was thinking if somebody wanted to focus in on a particular archetype, for example, let's just say, for example, health,
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what if I put Mercury on the first, or, you know, whatever. But I thought,
Yeah.
can you put a sign on the first, like Virgo, with, you know, fill it up with planets, it doesn't matter, but just put the sign on the first. What do you reckon?
Well, I think you can guess what I'm going to say. I say
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
put whatever you want on the first. Yeah, I mean, if something is speaking to you, and here's the other thing too, like there is the chart technique in it. And when I first started doing this, I looked at that more. Like, for example, when I put Venus on the first, I really paid attention to where the other planets fell and how that might change things. But over time, it's not that I don't think it's valid. I've just become, I find the most value comes in just living it. And so therefore, whether I chose Mercury first or Virgo first or Pisces first or Hygeia first, you know, like it wouldn't matter. The point is that you're choosing that as the part of yourself that you're going to experience life through. And so what you're going to basically do is you're going to bring that energy to the forefront, and we all have it all in us. And so, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Maybe we could talk about that more at some time too.
That would be great.
Yeah, and with health.
Oh yeah.
Because we haven't looked at this. We've talked about planets, and of course the planets represent different things, but we hadn't talked about this in the context of just, hey, I'm having issues with my health or my confidence, or you know what that may be. And so I think that's a great fun way to look at it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Carolyn, would you like to share what you're typing in the chat?
Yes, thank you, Linda. Hi, Tara.
Hi, Carolyn.
Maybe I don't. Maybe I do. Okay, so I have Uranus out of bounds.
Yeah, awesome.
In Cancer, and I've spent a lot of my life from time to time knowing I couldn't do differently, but wishing I could behave more conventionally. My Libra sun would really like me to behave more often. Right now, Uranus has been crossing my North Node, 5 Taurus in my first house. And I'm trying to remember who it was. Someone mentioned, which was a great aha moment for me, that reminded me that many of my planets, most of my planets are under the horizon and on the faded side of the chart. And I'm just, it's like, I keep wanting something to happen outside, like in the world. And
Yeah.
Why are you laughing at me?
Well, because that's like a good Libra. Every good Libra wants something to happen outside in the world, you know?
Really?
You've got everything underneath the horizon though, like it's inside's where it's happening.
Exactly. And then Taurus in the first, North Node in Taurus in the first house, it's like, be quiet, be a musician, you know, and it's like, oh, sigh, you know, but I'm certainly not comfortable.
Yeah.
Out, you know, like I have come to realize in my, I guess my 6th decade, I realized how much happier I was by myself at home.
Yeah.
So it's just, I don't know if you know anybody else who has it going over their North Node or anything about that.
I mean, not right now, but in general, anytime Uranus is going over anything, it's about really liberating, you know? And so with the North Node being that point of Dharma, or like how we're trying to grow, Uranus is trying to break free of anything that would be holding you back from doing what you need to do, you know? And a North Node in Taurus is, I mean, Taurus always on some level is about simplification, right? Getting down to what really matters to you. Yes. And in the first house, part of us getting down to what you really are. And so I forget the word you used about, you said something about your Libra would like you to be more, you didn't use the word appropriate, but you said something about. Yeah, whatever. But I would encourage you with Uranus to be just redefine what the conventional is. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's like Libra can just have a new definition of that and it will be fine. Like that would be the Uranian approach to it. Do you know? That's kind of how I feel about that energy.
Yeah, that makes that sits well.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that hard. I have the majority of my planets are under the horizon too, and I'm now 45. I've also discovered how much I just like to be alone and in my own space. The older I get, the more it's wonderful. Yeah. So, and so, yeah, I think that, I mean, without be a longer conversation to have, but Uranus on the North Node, give yourself permission to grow how you need to grow. And if you need to grow more in more solitary, that's still growth. You know, we think about growth as being always expanding out, but what if it's about you just becoming more solid and rooted in?
I've spent about 5 years now really being a hermit. First of all, it was just the way it was. I retired and that happened. But I'm finding it's interesting as I want to get out more, the virus thing happened. And I am in my little house in the country with people coming up from Montreal to buy toilet paper because there's none on the shelves in stores, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of, I'm watching the river flow. The river flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carolyn, thank you for sharing. I wish if we had more time, I would love to keep having conversation, but I know Linda has to move on to something else, but it's always nice to see you and it's nice to have you share. So thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
My pleasure.
So, Tara, we have about 2 minutes left if you'd like to sum up.
I feel like this has been great. Thank you to the volunteers, and thank you, Linda, and thank you to everyone for continuing this Planets First journey with me. I was thinking a little bit to myself about, you know, I only have a couple more planets to do in this series, and I didn't know where it would go next. But now, Linda, we've started talking about signs on the first, so thank you for getting me excited about maybe another way to do it. Yeah.
Oh, goody, thank you. Okay, would you all please thank Tara Ohl, everyone?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Everybody take care.
Thank you, Tara.
See you next time.
Tara.